Piracy, and this is the Vote Common Good podcast. It is Tuesday, which means we're going to talk about politics and the news, and you might notice that our fearless leader, Doug Padgett, is not with us today. He is in an undisclosed location, and we hope he's having a great time, but we're gonna talk about politics and the news nonetheless here on the Common Good podcast on Tuesday. But I get the really special opportunity today to have as my co-host the producer of the Common Good podcast, the guy who works behind the scenes that maybe you don't hear from quite nearly as often as you should, my friend Dan Dietrich. Dan, how are you, man?
What's up, everybody? Yeah, I'm doing all right, and I'm out from behind the curtain on the screen.
Are you? I'm actually not seeing you on the screen yet.
Well, let's
you
change that.
Gotta click a button so we can see you, Dan.
Here I am.
Hey,
I'm working with some older technology here. It's like a 6-year-old computer, and when I click a button, it takes like 45 seconds for things to happen. So
I think we need to have a conversation with the boss man about getting you an upgrade there with your 6-year-old computer.
I have to physically turn the wheels inside to make it work.
That's right. So we're gonna have a great conversation today. We're gonna talk about some stuff that's going on in the world, and then in a little bit we've got a special guest with us. Dr. Janja Lalich is going to be with us, and she is one of the world's foremost experts on cults, and we're going to be talking about cults and particularly political cults. Which is a category of cult maybe that a lot of people haven't thought about. And I'm pretty excited to have this conversation with Dr. Lalich. And so that's going to be happening in a bit. But before we head into all that, Dan, do you want to give everybody the rundown of what we do here on the Common Good podcast?
Yeah, if you're just joining us, if this is one of the first live streams or podcasts you've caught up with us, this is a daily podcast. And so every day has its own theme. Mondays, we tackle the news. Tuesdays, today is politics. Wednesdays is our Common Good Faith Day, and our hosts dive into theology and faith and what it means to live that out in the world. Thursdays, we tackle issues. So we, for the last 2 weeks, we've been talking about abortion, how we can have a more compassionate and understanding conversation about abortion. And then Fridays are typically Science Friday, a little nod to Science Friday on NPR, where we dig into issues that are affecting our climate, our culture, our society. And so you can follow us on all the social media platforms. Just search for Vote Common Good. But it'd be really helpful if you hop over to wherever you get your podcasts and hit that subscribe button. You can search for us, Vote Common Good Daily Podcast, or you can go to votecommongood.com/podcast and find all the links you need right there.
And of course, give us one of those great 5-star ratings and write a review. People don't realize like how much that actually helps in the podcast world. And so we'll have a shameless plug asking you to write us a little review and give us 5 stars. That would be awesome. So Dan, we hit a milestone this week. One that, I think we all expected to hit, but certainly not one that any of us wanted to hit. And that is, we crossed the line of 500,000 Americans dying from the coronavirus. A difficult and sobering milestone to hit that kind of number over the last year. Curious kind of what kind of reaction you have when you heard. I mean, we knew it was going to happen at some point, but when you heard that this was the week that we were passing that threshold, I'm curious what thoughts you had.
Yeah, it's devastating, and it's hard to wrap your mind around. You hear It's more deaths than those killed in World War II. It's more people have died than all our wars combined. It's just all these visualizations of trying to help you wrap your mind around how many people this is, and then how many families and family members this is also affected. And I think as a society, we just aren't equipped to process this level of grief, like this collective grief. And so I don't know how you're processing it or visualizing it or.
Yeah, that's really interesting. My wife Vanessa and I have talked for a long time about how we don't have real good rituals for grief in our culture already. I certainly don't want to I don't want to offend or alienate anybody by saying this, but often we don't know how to deal with death. We don't know how to deal with our pain and our hurt about death. And so instead of having funerals, we have like celebrations of life. And I've joked with my church and my family. I'm like, listen, when I die, I want a funeral. I want you people to be sad. I don't want you celebrating anything. I want you sad that I'm gone. And it's making light of something. But I think it's indicative of the reality that we don't know how to handle grief.
Yeah.
We're not well suited to deal with it well. We end up escaping into Netflix or alcohol or pot or food or whatever, work or exercise or whatever. And I think we've got, at any normal time, we've got a ton of people walking around struggling with their own grief. And now you layer on top of that this kind of massive collective grief over so many deaths that it's going to be real interesting to see kind of what comes out of this kind of pain, what is born on the other side.
For sure. And one thing I've been thinking a lot about is my kids. I've got 3 kids. They're they're young, they're growing up in this, and I think about the ways like the Great Depression affected a whole generation, and you just wonder what the effects of this past year and moving forward, what the effects are going to be on this generation that's growing up. It's like a collective trauma. My kids are starting to ease back into school in person, which I have mixed feelings about, but I'm hopeful that it can be done safely. And but even going back into the classroom, they're surrounded by like these cardboard and plexiglass things. They're masked up. The interactions with other kids are so limited. And so it's like a whole generation that's gone through a year of like isolation from other kids. And it's just going to be a lot to unpack moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And as if that wasn't enough, we I don't know. Anybody ready for 2022 yet? 2021 has been its own special version of horrible. We had this massive winter storm that came across the country, and here in Arkansas, we got way more snow than we ever normally get. I had some friends whose pipes froze or the power went out briefly, but it was not cataclysmic at all. I don't know what it was like for you there in Indiana, if it reached that far north, and y'all are much more attuned to handling the snow, as opposed to the state of Texas, which had on top of a pandemic, had a snowpocalypse that devastated the state, and people are still kind of digging out now. The weather's gotten better and the snow is receding, but there is so much damage from burst pipes, from the freezing, from, the people losing so much electricity being out, just massive devastation across the state of Texas. And, it's just, so hard to watch again, so many lives being devastated all at once. It's this kind of massive collective, like, man, what in the world are we living through right now?
Yeah, and just a failure on so many levels. And then the immediate finger pointing starts. And I thought it was just incredible that right out of the gate, they blame the Green New Deal on AOC. Yeah. Like she snuck back in time and decided to make Texas, she snuck in all these green energy windmills that would freeze in the winter because they didn't want to put in the heaters.
I want to say to them, like, the Green New Deal's not a thing yet, right? Like, this is just a proposal at this point. This is just an idea. This isn't actually a thing. And yet, it's so ridiculous. I get so frustrated with these politicians kind of trying to politicize. And I think at times tragedies need to be politicized because they highlight failures of policy. Yeah. But to politicize them in a way of just trying to score cheap political points as opposed to advancing policies that will be solutions to the problems we face is just, craven at the worst. And, I'm not sure anyone lost more points this last week in the political sense than Senator Ted Cruz.
Oh man.
I don't know. Dan, your kids are in the 10 to 12-year-old range, right? Most of mine are older than that. I've got one who's younger than that, but yours are kind of in that range. Senator Ted Cruz's daughters are 12 and 10. Would you fly your kids to another country and drop them off?
No, that's not a thing.
Is that
people
a thing
do.
You would do? No, it's not a thing people do.
Yeah, my kids are 7, 9, and 11, right in that range. And no, you don't. And even if they're like, Dad, we want to go somewhere warm. I'm like, yeah, me too. But we've got some stuff to do here.
Your kids aren't lobbying you to take them on international trips? Come on, Dad. It's snowing outside. Take us to a resort.
During a pandemic.
No?
No. It's
my goodness. Ted Cruz. So this is utterly ridiculous. Ted Cruz, listen, on one level, I totally get it. Like, you get stir crazy in a house. I'm sure you've been there, Dan. There's a pandemic. There's, you're stuck inside because of this snowstorm. You can't fly off to Washington, D.C. and get away from it all. You're stuck inside with your family and your dog that looks like the dog from Silence of the Lambs, but that's a whole nother story too. It's this miserable experience. I get it. You think, okay, let's do something. Let's go. And apparently he had his staff call the airport to help them get through all of that, which is so annoying.
Used police resources to make sure he could get through the crowds. And yeah. Yep.
Ends up on a plane to Cancun with his family, pulling behind him a casket size suitcase. And by the time he lands can you just imagine, him turning his phone off? And then he's probably one of those people that doesn't actually abide by airline guidelines when it comes to that kind of thing. But I just have this image of him turning his phone back on when he lands in Cancun and connecting, and like all of these messages from his staff and his friends and reporters about, wait a minute, you went to Mexico while your state is suffering, while people are dying, while people are without electricity, and this like horrible, horrible thing has taken place, and you just ran off to a resort in Cancun. Could you be more tone deaf?
Yeah. And we laugh, but it's a dereliction of duty. These are your constituents. Absolutely. These are your people. This is your job to represent them and take care of them and look out for them. And it's just like, I don't know, Senate 101. You be there when the times are tough.
Right. And Ted Cruz has been pretty vocal in criticizing other people for taking vacations at points. So they come up with this, okay, so what are we going to do? What, like, how do we spin this? And the story they came up with is, my daughters wanted to get away, and so I was just taking them to drop them off. Like it was a sleepover around the block at their friend's house. You know, like it's such a ridiculous story. And he gets back and, you know, the photo op yesterday of him loading water into people's cars. And when he gets back, like he doesn't immediately go to work to help people. You know what he does? He does like a big media tour. He's on Sean Hannity's show and it's just, he's just so bad at this.
Yeah. And meanwhile,
take it, go. Meanwhile,
the person that caused this devastation, the architect of the Green New Deal and time traveler, AOC, is in Texas on the ground and raised what, $5 million?
$5 million
for food banks and resources that people desperately need. And it's just, if you're cynical, you can say it's a bit of a political stunt to kind of point out some failures of Ted Cruz. But also it's just, this is what we're supposed to do. We help each other. And when the going gets tough, you get on the ground and you help people. So.
Absolutely. And, Ted Cruz is, you talk about political stunts. Ted Cruz, loading a case of water into somebody's trunk and getting a picture taken.
Was there that's paper great. Towel to throw into a crowd? Or?
Yeah, that's great. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the representative from New York, put together a fundraiser and over a period of time raised $5 million that is going completely to charities in Texas. And she's made the point, and she's completely right. She's made the point that charity is not a substitute for better policy.
Yeah.
What we need is better policy, better legislation. And we all, I think, know far more now about the interconnectedness of power grids than we ever did before. And she is making the point that what we need are long-term and effective solutions to these problems. But in the meantime, we need to help relieve the suffering of people on the ground. And she's involved doing that. She's really on the front lines of both. And that's why I call her my favorite congresswoman.
Yeah.
Because she's just that great.
Pretty great.
Yep. So speaking of devastation, Donald Trump had a pretty devastating week. Listen, at some point we're going to stop talking about Donald Trump. I don't know what that point is. So. I don't know.
It's kind of fun.
Doug's not with us to stop me from talking about Donald Trump. Not that I think that he would, but Donald Trump had a really miserable week at the Supreme Court. Supreme Court once again voting against election lawsuits. He continues to lose election lawsuits, and when you've only got Clarence Thomas on your side, you're probably in trouble. But more significantly than that, the Supreme Court ruled that the Southern District of New York and the New York DA can get a hold of Donald Trump's financial records, including tax returns and other documents. It could be the treasure trove that we all have kind of thought that existed in terms of identifying and documenting the corruption that has been present in Trump's business dealings, that has shown kind of what he's like and how he's done business and where his loyalties lie. And now, finally, we're going to have the opportunity to see if there's any there. And, Donald Trump repeatedly promised that when the audit of his taxes by the IRS was over, he would release them. That audit, apparently it's the longest audit in the history of the world. I'm just thinking of, what was that? Was it Stranger Than Fiction? What's the movie with Will Ferrell and Maggie Gyllenhaal?
Yeah,
where he investigates her her taxes at the little cupcake shop that she owns. He's a tax investigator. Just imagine, Will Ferrell going through Donald Trump's paperwork as he, rides on that bus. I don't remember what movie this was. I don't know if it was.
It might not exist.
It's just in my head. That would be a strange thing.
No, I know.
So, at some point we're going to find out, it has the corruption that we have expected to exist within the Trump family and Trump Corporation. Does it, and has it did it extend into the Trump administration? So a really bad week for Donald Trump, and his, his standing legally, which seems to be in jeopardy in all sorts of places, including Georgia and in New York as well.
Yeah, when your hand-picked Supreme Court continually sides against you, that's
seriously
pointing to some trouble.
Have they? I mean, we know he asked Robert Mueller for loyalty. I have always assumed that he did the same with his Supreme Court picks and has some sense that they're going to be loyal to him. And maybe not explicitly, but implicitly, that has, probably existed. How does he feel like does he feel like they're stabbing him in the back? Does he feel like they're being disloyal? I wonder how much buyer's remorse he has for these three Supreme Court justices that he thought would, be there to protect him, and they consistently have not.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wonder what folks that voted for Trump feel about those justices as well. The folks that they championed, and, Amy Coney Barrett got on the court, and then the court immediately ruled against Trump in all these election fraud cases, said, no, there's nothing there. You don't have a case. This is, yeah.
Yeah. One of my favorite Twitter follows is, it was called Parlor Takes. It's now called Patriot Takes. They changed the name, but basically what this Twitter account does is monitor all of the right-wing social media, including Parler and Gab and all those other places that, MeWe and, all the places that, conservative folks ran off to, because, they were getting some consequences for their free speech, on other platforms. And I'd just like to say thank you, Stephen, for chiming in and saying it was in fact Stranger Than Fiction. There we go.
Vindication.
Vindication. A fantastic movie, a absolutely fantastic movie. So Parlor Takes, what they do is it's called Patriot Takes now because they monitor more than just Parler. They will monitor what's happening on kind of right-wing social media in these places, and then screen share them and share them on Twitter. It's a great Twitter follow, and there was a share that they had yesterday, which was calling Amy Coney Barrett and Brett Kavanaugh, members of the deep state, which is just fantastic. How they have turned.
Yeah,
I know they turned so quickly on their own. Speaking of which, Donald Trump is going to be speaking next week at CPAC, the annual convention of one of the largest conservative organizations in the country. It's typically a big thing. Apparently, Mike Pence has turned down an invitation to speak. Doesn't want to share the stage with a person who encouraged people to kill him, which I, totally get. And good on you, Mike Pence. But word has leaked that Donald Trump is going to declare himself the presumptive nominee for the Republican Party in 2024. He's going to declare himself the dear leader of the Republican Party, and he is going to use this speech as an opportunity to exact some revenge on his political enemies that I think are not just in the Democratic Party, but in the Republican Party as well, including the 10 House of Representative members who voted for his impeachment and the 7 senators that voted for his conviction of that impeachment. And so it's going to be real interesting. Dan, have you ever anticipated a CPAC speech as much as you're anticipating this one?
I'm pretty sure I'm going to be busy when that is happening.
I think we probably ought to maybe live stream it and have like ongoing commentary. We can like live podcast it like we would live
Mystery Science Theater 3000 style.
Yeah, it might be kind of fun, to see what happens with Donald Trump when he once again stands behind a microphone with adoring fans behind him. It's gonna be really interesting. Yeah. And declaring himself the dear leader of the Republican Party, there was some polling that came out this week that seemed to indicate that nearly half of Republicans would follow Donald Trump to a new party if he started one. It really seems like there are deep divisions in the Republican Party that very well could lead to a fracture of some kind. And whoever keeps the Republican brand after that, it'll be interesting to see if the Republican Party goes the way of the Whig Party. When the Republican Party was born. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yeah.
And what happens.
Well, Rob, I believe our guest is joining us.
Awesome.
Do you want to go ahead and introduce her, and we'll?
Yeah. So I don't know if everybody has had the chance to see the documentary series on HBO. It's on HBO Max, and it is about Heaven's Gate. And you remember Heaven's Gate? That was the folks who thought that they were going to get beamed up by a UFO that was in the tail of the Hale-Bopp comet, and they ended up very literally drinking the Kool-Aid and committed a mass suicide. And so this documentary kind of tells the story of this cult, and I think it's called Heaven's Gate: Cult of Cults, and it's on HBO, and I would highly recommend folks to check it out. And so Vanessa and I are watching this documentary and learning so much and really enjoying it. And one of the people that is a part of this documentary is our guest today, Dr. Janja Lalich. And Dr. Lalich mentions in passing on the documentary that she was once part of a political cult. And I hit the pause button and I turned to Vanessa and I said, a political cult? That's a new, like we normally think of cults as religious cults. And we think of cults, in that way, but the idea of there being a category of political cult, I immediately grabbed my phone and texted Doug and said, we've got to talk to this lady about political cults, because apparently that's a thing. So Dr. Lalich, thank you so much for being with us. And you are one of the foremost experts on cults in the world. You've got a website, cultresearch.org, that I'd encourage folks to check out. Thank you for being with us. Can you tell us about, for those of us that normally think of cults as religious things, Can you talk to us a bit about this category of political cults?
Sure. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, you know, there are many kinds of cults. I think most people do think cults are only religious, but that's just one category. I mean, there's every kind of cult imaginable, martial arts cults and therapy cults and, you know, self-improvement cults, et cetera, et cetera. So political cults are just one type of category. There are political cults on the left and the right, as we've seen recently. And, you know, it's the same phenomenon. There's an authoritarian leader. There's some type of belief system that only this person can offer you. There's an indoctrination program and a structure that's set up to retain you and keep you doing what you're supposed to do as a good cult member.
Those are you just kind of ran down through the hallmarks of what we see in cults. You know, the kind of the common characteristics across the board. That dominating leader, that authoritarian leader. You know, we've got these kind of images in our heads of the Charles Mansons, the Jim Joneses,
Right.
those kinds of folks. And they're typically very scary now, but for folks that are joining the group, these folks are not scary. There's something appealing. There's something attractive. Why is it that people are attracted to authoritarian leaders? Like what, and I'm sure there's probably all sorts of different reasons depending on the person, but are there common characteristics of why people are attracted to authoritarian leaders and the cults that they lead?
Well, you know, if there's any common denominator among those who join cults, it's idealism. You know, some type of hope for a better world, a better life, more money, you know, whatever it might be. So
Making America great again.
Making America great again, absolutely. So if
Yeah.
you know, if someone comes along and has a message that somehow resonates with you, then you're going to kind of listen to that person and perhaps follow. And so, but the important thing is that the message has to resonate. So, you know, I always say I never would have joined a meditation cult because I can't sit still that long. But a political cult that was going to, you know, get rid of racism and sexism and classism, well, you know, that sounded fantastic. Not that I knew it was a cult, obviously. So these leaders tend to be narcissists. They tend to be very clever. They seem to be able to read people very well and have insights. They're also very erratic in their behavior. But the important thing, I think, which most people have a misconception about, is this idea of charisma. Charisma is actually a social relationship. Most people think of charisma as an attribute that's inherent in an individual, right? That, oh, you're born with charisma and you're going to grow up to be a charismatic leader. No, it doesn't work like that. When you meet someone and you're in awe of that person, you actually attribute charisma to that person, right? It's a social relationship. Once you've done that, once you've decided or believe that that person is charismatic, then that sets up a power relationship. And it's an imbalance of power because the charismatic one has power over you. So that's why we can see, you know, all types of people who become leaders with, you know, hundreds or thousands of followers who are completely enthralled. Whereas, you know, you might look at that person and say, I don't get it. What are they seeing, right? Because it's
Right.
that individual relationship. It's that charismatic relationship for each person.
Wow. That's super interesting. Wow. Dan, do you have any questions that you want to jump in with?
Yeah.
I mean, I can keep going, but I want to give you the opportunity to jump in.
Well, obviously today we're talking politics and the similarities between you know, political affiliation and cults. Are there what are the 3 signs or 3 warning signs you're in a cult? and how might they fit or overlay onto your political affiliation?
Well, I think I think first of all, we need to establish, I think, that what we've seen today in America, which I assume is what you're getting at, is sort of a cult on a national scale, and we've never seen that before. Which means it's a little bit more amorphous. It's not like all these folks are living on a compound somewhere. Not that all cults are like that either. But so what we have is the red flags. I think there are several. One is a sense of urgency. If you're being encouraged, like, oh, you have to do this now, and you're being bombarded with things on the internet to go look at. So that sense of urgency is something that should warn you, like, slow down, take your time, check things out thoroughly. Secondly, if there's a lack of transparency, cults are not democratic organizations. And so if there's no way to hold the leader accountable, if nobody's really answering your questions, if you can't find out what happens with the money, right? If you're just told things like, oh, well, don't ask that question yet. You don't know enough yet. Come to a few more things and then ask that question later. And then, of course, later you don't remember what the question was, right? And of course, the fact that there's a lack of accountability. In a cult, there are no checks and balances, and you're not allowed to challenge the leader or question the leader. So I think that those are some of the red flags. And what's important to know is that most people who join cults, over 2/3 of the people who get into cults, are recruited by a friend, a family member, or a coworker, right? So that means you're invited to something by someone you know, and it's much harder to say no to someone you know, right? So you think, okay, Joe in the next cubicle keeps asking me to go to this. Finally, all right, Joe, I'll go, right? So and once they get you to that first thing, then it develops from there.
Yeah. What have you seen any impact of social media on cults? And we live in a day now that's dominated by Facebook and Twitter, and it seems like much of the the Trumpism and the QAnon stuff lives online.
Right.
What impact has social media had on it that would have been it wasn't possible to be a part of an online cult in the 70s. You had to move across the country and move on to the commune. You don't necessarily have to do that now. So what impact has social media had on all of this?
Yeah, well, we've really seen that influence over the last few decades. I think Heaven's Gate, which you were talking about earlier, was probably one of the first cults that had an online presence, and actually did some recruiting online. I always used to say, oh, well, in order to get into a cult, there has to be some personal contact somewhere along the line. We saw that with the international terrorist recruiting, ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Somebody would get interested by someone online, but then they would go to Pakistan or wherever to get training, right? So they actually finally had a physical group who influenced them. But now we see, of course, that social media is so much more present in our lives today, which I think is one reason why people are joining these groups, because the world has gotten so complex. And what cults do is offer you a framework for understanding the world, right? And so that's what, especially I think during the pandemic, people were spending more and more time online. And who knew what the hell was going on in the world between COVID and Trump, right? So people latch on to these things and get drawn in. So the difference now is that we don't have sort of the tightly structured kind of cult that we saw before, what I now call the run-of-the-mill cults. And now we see this happening online, but they actually are forming online communities. So there still is that sense of peer pressure and belonging to some kind of social group, which is, as human beings, what we're drawn to. We're social animals.
Yeah.
Do you consider Trumpism a cult at this point?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think, and I have for some time, I think Trump behaved like a cult leader. He's completely narcissistic. Everything was about him. He did everything he could to drum up his followers whenever he could with his rallies and whatnot. He had catchy slogans, make America great, lock her up, whatever, which gets people riled up. So he, as a good, quote, charismatic leader, he put himself in front of his followers every now and then to reinvigorate them. He created what we call an us versus them mentality, which is one of the hallmarks of a cult. And he, of course, allied with, the most despicable parts of our society, unfortunately. But he gave them the kind of encouragement that those groups needed. I mean, those groups, the white supremacists, the neo-Nazis, etc., had always been very fringe. But by getting the nods and approval and the dog whistles from Trump, that emboldened them, and that makes them seem now like a mass movement, like a real social movement, rather than just some fringe characters, right? And then, of course, he did what we call love bombing, which is that, we saw that on January 6th, where he said, "I love you, you're so special, I'm here for you, I'm here with you." Those are the kinds of things, again, that, tug at the heartstrings of the followers.
So talk more about love bombing. That's a technique that's used by cult leaders?
Yes. And the cult lieutenants or the middle level managers or whatever you call them. I mean, that's what happens when you get recruited. You'll go to something. And again, I'm talking about a physical cult now. You'll go to something or your friend might bring you, and you suddenly get, you'll get targeted by the other cult members that are there. And so you'll suddenly be surrounded by these people who think you're wonderful, or your clothes are beautiful, or your voice is so amazing, or whatever. And so you suddenly feel like, wow, you feel really terrific, and you're being recognized and you're being loved. And so that kind of obligates you to come back to the next thing when they ask you to come along. You're like, oh, well, these people are so nice to me. How can I say no? Right. So it's part of one of the influence techniques that are used. And so the love bombing happens, during recruitment, but also during time in the cult. Although there's also the opposite. The thing with cult leaders is, because they're narcissists and they're often erratic and unable to control themselves, when they appear, you never know if it's going to be the nice, sweet, loving cult leader or the monster cult leader, right? And so that keeps people on edge. It keeps them, walking on eggshells, and so that anxiety also serves the purpose of the leader.
Yeah.
Yeah, Doctor, I'm very curious. How do people leave cults?
Yes.
And how do you help?
Millions of people are asking me that question right now.
And how do you?
First thing I always say is, there's no magic bullet. If I had one, I'd be very rich. I think most people leave on their own, making an individual decision. I mean, we have seen people leave when sometimes if there's been a scandal or the leader dies, and so there's upheaval. But in general, it's because the person hits the wall with some kind of sense of disillusionment. And the way I talk about it is that I think everyone in a cult or in a high control group, whatever you want to call it, everyone has doubts. I mean, I was a true believer. I was in leadership. I was in the inner circle. I had doubts. I think everybody has doubts. And because you're in a closed environment, what I call a bounded reality, you don't have a way to express those doubts or talk to anyone about them, because, of course, that's a no-no, right? So the way I see it is, I use this metaphor. You have this little shelf in the back of your head, and so all these doubts get put on that shelf. And so at some point, something will happen. One more thing will happen that'll break that shelf. And then these doubts come flooding out. That doesn't mean the person leaves at that point, because depending on the group, you have to figure out your escape or how to leave. It's often not easy. But that's why I tell people who have someone they know or love in a cult, what you want to do is plant seeds on that shelf. You want to somehow encourage a little bit of critical thinking, or a reminder of good times together, pictures of the family having that famous Thanksgiving dinner, whatever, things that'll keep adding onto that shelf, little seeds that'll grow until they become big enough that it crashes the shelf.
Is there a typical time frame that you see from when a person begins to think, hey, I might leave this thing, to when they actually do? Is it normally a 6-month process, a 2-month process? I mean, is there any kind of data around that?
Well, not really. I mean, it's such an individual thing, and it so much depends on if the person still has family or friends or resources outside of the cult that they feel they can go to, which is, again, why I tell people always leave the door open, be a safe haven for that person. I mean, the hardest thing you're ever going to do is leave a cult. And so you want to know you can go somewhere where you're not going to be laughed at or have people say, see, I told you so, you ninny, right? But it really does vary. I mean, in my case, when I finally had my so-called aha moment, I was absolutely miserable. I knew I had to get out of there, but I couldn't figure out how to leave. I had nowhere to go. I had no money. I had no friends outside the cult. My parents had both died. I was just stuck. I was psychologically paralyzed, and also our group, we went after people, especially someone like me who was high level. And I used to just wish every day that I would be killed in a car accident, because it was the only way that I could see to get out. So for me, it was years. For some people, it might be a matter of months, especially when there's family in the cult. That's difficult for people to leave their family behind. The last book I did was about children who grew up in cults, and I interviewed 65 people who had grown up in a cult and left on their own, either in late adolescence or adulthood. And, they all left family. They all have been shunned. They all have never seen their family again. Many are afraid to speak out because they don't want to make it even worse, that they'll never get to see their family. So it's really such an individual thing. And there is no timeline, really.
Yeah, you've touched on this a little bit, but there's a lot of us that have family and friends that we have seen radicalized by Fox News.
Right.
We have seen, begin to, buy into the QAnon conspiracy theories. We have seen I had a family member that I was talking to about the insurrection on January 6th, and their response to me was, I would vote for Trump again. And this happened because Antifa was trying to make the president look bad. And I was just, it was stunned. I was stunned, and it was like a gut punch of here I thought this thing that would, be a wake-up call, a shock to the system that would cause people to realize, oh no, I've fallen prey to this dubious thing. Or like all the predictions haven't come true. They keep moving the goalposts. So there's so many of us that have this deep sense of dread that we've got family members and friends that's feeling increasingly hopeless for. What would you say to folks that are, what do you say to me feeling that way about my family member? Is there any hope for people that have fallen prey to these kinds of lies and these deceptions?
Well, I always say never give up hope. You want to try to do whatever you can to keep communicating with that person non-controversially. Don't talk politics, talk about Aunt Mary or whatever, birthday parties, things that person used to like, are they still playing guitar? I don't know, whatever, things that'll kind of take them back to where they were before and what your relationships were before. You absolutely don't want to confront them. And I've worked with people who left cults after 40 years, 50 years. I think most people do eventually leave. And I know that this phenomena is so frustrating and shocking to people because the things the QAnoners believe in are so ludicrous that it's hard to say. How did my brother? How did that happen? How does he believe that stuff? Right. But you can't think like that. You have to think, how can I reconnect with my brother or whoever it is?
Yeah.
And
you said not to confront. What, like, I think there's probably an impulse of like, well, I can argue with them. I can give them the information. That doesn't work.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. When you're in a cult, your mind is closed, right? You're closed off to any kind of counter information. And so as soon as someone hits you with that, you're going to go into defensive mode. And it's just going to back them into a corner and push them deeper into the cult. So you absolutely don't want to argue. You don't want to show them facts. You don't want to rail about Fox News. You don't want to say Trump is an idiot. You have to be compassionate in whatever way you can with that person. And I know it's difficult, and one of the dangers today, of course, that we've seen is that, a number of people in QAnon did get disillusioned when Trump didn't come back on January 6th, right? Some of them left, some of them are doubting, many of them are doubting. And of course, you probably know this. What's happening is they're getting recruited by the white supremacist groups and the racist groups and the neo-Nazi groups, right? Because they're vulnerable. They've just lost this thing they were holding on to. So, these other groups are going in and snatching them up. That's dangerous because those groups are armed and we've seen what they can do. So yeah, I realize it's extremely frustrating for people. But we can't give up hope. We have to find ways to help guide them out.
Yeah. We at Vote Common Good, we're working on a curriculum for churches to help with the de-radicalization of white evangelicals, because white evangelicals have been radicalized, and so that's something that we're working on, that hopefully can be available to pastors and church leaders who who are looking out over their congregations and seeing folks that are a part of their churches that have been radicalized in this way.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, that's one of the things I say we need, is we need kind of a national education program. And I know that sounds very socialistic. And so, people freak out when you say anything like that. But, we need to get back to critical thinking. I mean, we've seen what I call the dumbing down of America, and I don't mean that to be offensive to people. But the reality is, since television and then certain channels, and I think they don't focus enough on critical thinking in the schools. And I think we really need something like that to really educate young people and adults to be wary of these organizations that hold out these, promises of some kind of salvation. So that's wonderful that you're doing that.
Yeah, people don't realize they're in a cult, do they? Like that's
absolutely not.
They think they've found that thing they were looking for.
Exactly.
But they don't. There's a self-delusion.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you think you're in the greatest organization you ever could have found, and this is the answer to your life. I mean, when I was in my group, and we were headquartered in San Francisco, and the San Francisco Chronicle and the Examiner at the time, they were both papers, they used to write articles about us saying, oh, the DWP is a cult and these people are bananas over their leader. And of course, we just did damage control and said, oh, well, they're just red baiting. And at one point, we literally gathered up all the articles that had been written about us like that and put them in a little bulletin. Well, it was 25 pages or so. And we gave it to people on the street for 25 cents. Like, here's what they're saying about us, And it's like, we had no clue, people must have thought we were completely crazy, here, they're saying we're a cult, Wow. So no, nobody thinks they're in a cult.
Are there other resources that are out there for people that have family members, that have friends that have gone this direction? Is that Ollie, by the way.
That's
So
Ollie, yes.
oh, good. So Dr. Lalich was supposed to be with us a couple weeks ago, and Ollie, her dog, had a bit of an emergency. Ollie's doing okay?
Yeah, they never figured it out. What they decided was that it was maybe a spider bite or some kind of insect bite that caused a sort of allergic, anxiety reaction. It was freaky. It was freaky. So
yeah, well, I'm so glad that Ollie's doing well. It's good to hear. So what resources are out there for people that maybe would want to learn more, that would want to dive a little bit deeper? Either resources that you've produced, shameless plug time, or other ones that you would recommend for people that might want to kind of understand where their family members and friends are at this point.
Well, certainly, one of my books is called Take Back Your Life, Recovering from Cults and Abusive Relationships, and it's on Amazon, and soon it'll be out in audio form. It's not just a recovery book. It really is a very kind of down-to-earth explanation of how cults work, how they operate, and then also there is a great deal of focus on recovery. But for someone who has someone in a cult, it'll explain what happened to them, and it'll help them understand what that person's going to go through when they come out, like what are some of the after effects. Certainly my other book, Escaping Utopia, is really relevant for anyone who grew up in a cult or has someone who's grown up in a cult. And so all of that information is on my website, which you mentioned, cultresearch.org. So there's my other books, there's articles, there's checklists, things like that. Other than that, there are several people who work in this field who also are trying to do some kind of public education. There's a really good therapist in New York named Daniel Shaw, who wrote an excellent book called Traumatic Narcissism. And so he has a really, really excellent understanding of how narcissists work. And so his point is, if you're in a relationship with a traumatic narcissist, what that means is you're going to experience trauma by being in a relationship with that person. So other than that, I think it's there are support groups of people who've left groups. I run a Zoom support group for former cult members, and I'm about to start one for families and friends. That'll be every other Friday afternoon. And so I think support groups have, they've been very, very helpful for former cult members, and I'm hoping they'll be helpful for families. People like you who are like going through this on your own probably, and to have a group being able to share ideas and just kind of commiserate with each other is helpful, because self-care is very important.
Yeah. Absolutely. Dr. Lalich, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your work and your insights. And, it certainly feels like we are in uncharted territory as a culture and as a country, trying to figure out, it feels like cults used to be this fringe thing that would be like little pockets of people. And now we're in this situation where, we've got whole media networks devoted, to propagating this one that is, national. So we thank you for your insights and your leadership, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. And I'd love to hear more about the curriculum that you're creating. And if you'd like me to look at anything or anything like that, I'd be happy to.
You consider yourself recruited.
Oh, no.
Thank you so much. It's been great chatting with you today. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Well, Dan, do you feel the need to leave an organization that you're a part of all of a sudden? Have you had some realization that maybe you're part of a cult?
No. No, I've definitely
really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, really appreciate that conversation though. And I think one of the big takeaways for me is the don't confront thing.
Right.
Which is such a hard
the impulse is to fight back.
And if I can just say it the right way, if I can just present the right facts, they'll come around. And I think that's good advice.
One of my, folks probably know that I'm a pastor here in Fayetteville, Arkansas. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is in the book of Romans. There's this little phrase that's tucked in that you can easily miss, but it's this little phrase that Paul says that it's God's kindness that leads us to repentance. It's kindness that leads us to repentance.
Yeah.
It's not judgment. It's not confrontation. It's not shame. It's not guilt. It's not more information. It's kindness that leads us to repentance. That is so often our experience. And yet it's so easy to kind of have that impulse to fight back.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not the thing that's needed. So really fascinating stuff. I think we're in like quite a situation now with Trumpism that, having someone who can talk about the reality of what happens when people are stuck in cults, it's so very applicable to, where we're at politically right now. Yeah. So Dan, I've enjoyed having this conversation with you. Doug will be back next week as we continue on with our Common Good podcast, talking about politics on Tuesdays. Encourage everybody to tune in tomorrow to be a part of the conversation that takes place about faith. And then throughout the week, you can find us on all of those places where you listen to podcasts, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Google or Spotify. All of those places you can tune in. And I encourage you to check out cultresearch.org for more resources from Dr. Lalich. And want to thank everybody for listening in today. And we will be back with you tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll see you soon.